Hey guys, tonight we have a soft, strange little story for you. It takes place in a sleepy village where the air smells like ripe plums, and the loudest noise most days is the rustling of laundry on the line or the soft cooing of doves in the rafters. But one summer, one very particular summer, something quite odd happened, something that I can't forget even now. You might not have experienced this before a goose doing postal work. So if you're wrapped up in your blanket, maybe a bit restless, maybe just looking to float into sleep, you're in the right place. Feel free to close your eyes and imagine the warm cobblestone under your feet, a sun-faded house with green shutters, and the smell of baked bread mixed with, well, goose feathers. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that little bell so you won't miss any more curious tales like this one. All right, now let's get into today's diary entry. I grew up in a quiet little village nestled between gentle hills and a lazy river, somewhere in Eastern Europe. The kind of place where time moves slower and everybody knew who baked what bread by the smell that drifted from their windows. Our house was small, painted a pale yellow with lavender growing wild along the fence. My parents kept chickens, a modest garden, and an entirely unnecessary number of cats. The summer this story takes place, I was 10, maybe 11, and everything smelled like plums. The plum trees in our backyard and our neighbors' backyards were heavy with fruit, dropping them in soft plops that startled the chickens and stained the soil. Every morning I woke up to the sound of plums landing on the tin roof over our porch, followed by the soft grunt of my father picking them up and tossing them into a wicker basket. It was also the summer I learned that sometimes animals are more responsible than people give them credit for, and other times not at all. Our neighbor Mr. Petrov was a wiry old man with a thick mustache and a peculiar sense of logic. He lived alone except for his goose Matilda. She was white, sharp-beaked, and deeply judgmental. She walked with the self-importance of a headmistress and had a very particular distaste for our village mailman. Now our mailman Thomas was a nice enough fellow, though always in a rush. He had one of those rusty bicycles with the big basket in front and the little squeaky bell he never rang. He'd wobble through the village road like he was trying not to spill secrets from every envelope. But every time Thomas neared Mr. Petrov's house, Matilda would come charging from the garden, honking like she had something deeply personal against the postal system. And I mean charging. Wings, outstretched neck, extended like a lance, feet slapping on the cobblestones. The first time I saw it, I thought she was trying to defend the property. But she never went for strangers, only Tomas. She didn't just chase him, she chased his letters. One day she even grabbed one from the air, right as it flew out of his bike basket. "She's got a calling," Mr. Petrov muttered, as if Matilda had chosen a life path. He said it with complete seriousness, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. "She hates the mail," my mother whispered at lunch, "or she loves it too much." No one really knew. That summer dragged on in the soft, golden way summers tend to do when you're a child and the afternoons melt into sticky evenings. I'd spend most of my time outside barefoot on the warm stone path reading comic books in the shade, or helping my father hang jars of preserved plums in the cellar. But every now and then I'd hear it again, Thomas yelling Matilda, honking, and Mr. Petrov calmly sipping tea like this was completely normal. One afternoon, after a particularly enthusiastic chase, Tomas finally snapped. He veered his bike away too fast, hit a stone, and landed sideways in Mr. Petrov's fence. The basket flipped. Letters flew. One landed in Matilda's beak like fate had stepped in. She didn't shred it. She waddled quite seriously back to Mr. Petrov and dropped it at his feet like a retriever delivering a prize. Mr. Petrov stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "She delivers better than you, Thomas." That's when it began. At first it was a joke. Thomas, limping and brushing gravel from his knees, muttered, Fine, let the goose do it. I remember standing near the fence chewing on a sour plum, thinking there was no way Mr. Petrov would actually try it. But the very next morning, Matilda appeared at the village square with a tiny blue mailbag slung awkwardly over her back. It was a repurposed coin purse with some string and buttons tied around her wings. Ridiculous, truly, but she stood there like a proud courier, feathers gleaming, honking softly at the baker as he approached with a letter to post. Nobody expected what happened next. Matilda took it, held it in her beak, and waddled straight without pause down the path toward the next house. Not a zigzag, not a peep, just walked it over. She's been watching the route, Mr. Petrov explained later. She's memorized it. Everyone laughed, but Matilda wasn't joking. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the distant cooing of pigeons in the eaves, I couldn't help but picture her, Matilda, the world's grumpiest, most ambitious goose, marching through town with secrets folded in envelopes. It was the first time I felt a story happening in real time right outside my window. And that was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up early. I don't know why exactly. Maybe it was the air still warm from yesterday's sun, or the smell of plums stewing in a pot downstairs, but something tugged at me to get outside. So I patted down in my bare feet, careful not to wake my brother, and slipped out the back door. The village was always quiet before breakfast, like it was holding its breath. I walked past the chickens, scratching near the compost, and leaned against the old wooden fence that divided our yard from Mr. Petrov's. And there she was, Matilda, standing in the middle of the cobblestone path with her little blue mailbag slung over her back like she was born with it. The strap sat awkwardly behind her wings and the bag kept sliding to one side, but she adjusted it with such focus it felt almost intentional. Mr. Petrov stood nearby with a clipboard and a mug of steaming tea, watching like a proud general. "You're up early," he called. "I wanted to see," I said, and he nodded, as if this was entirely expected. "She's getting quicker," he murmured, eyes not leaving Matilda. "Yesterday she delivered 6 letters. Only stepped on one." I giggled. A few minutes later, Tomas appeared on foot, still limping a little from his fall, though his expression was much less pain than you might expect from a man being replaced by poultry. He handed Mr. Petrov a small bundle of letters already sorted. Matilda, as if on cue, waddled forward and tilted her head. Mr. Petrov gently tucked 3 envelopes into the mailbag. The others he held back. "We're going easy today," he said to her, like she understood. "Trial run, old root." She honked once, sharp and clear, and turned on her heel. And just like that, she began her deliveries. I followed, keeping a polite distance, pretending to pick daisies or kick at loose stones. Matilda was something to behold. She strutted like she had been doing this her whole life. She stopped at the Kovach's house and looked up at the gate. Sure enough, the front door creaked open. "Oh, hello there," said Mrs. Kovach in her usual sing-song voice. "Is that a letter for me, dear?" Matilda made a soft clicking noise and flapped once. I don't know what came over me, but I stepped up and gently lifted the flap of the bag. Sure enough, there it was, addressed to Mrs. Kovach. I handed it over. "Well, bless this bird," she said, patting Matilda like she was a favored niece. Much more charming than Thomas, that's for sure. Matilda preened at that, stretching her neck as though she understood the compliment. From there we made 2 more stops. One to the grumpy old bachelor who lived near the well. He simply grunted and took his letter with a wary eye. And the other to the baker's wife, who cooed and tried to feed Matilda a chunk of sweet roll. Matilda accepted the offering, of course. When we returned to Mr. Petrov's garden, I felt like I had witnessed something strangely official, like history being written with feathers and crumbs. "She's a natural," Mr. Petrov said, proudly stroking his mustache, "and cleaner than Thomas." At lunch, I told my parents everything. My father raised an eyebrow. My mother didn't even look up from peeling potatoes. "I don't trust birds with sharp beaks," she muttered. "They hold grudges." Still, it became the talk of the village within 2 days. By the end of the week, Thomas had given up. Completely. He dropped off the letters at Mr. Petrov's gate every morning, muttering something about saving his knees and goose insurance not existing. More and more villagers started to watch Matilda make her rounds. Some took photos with their old box cameras. Children offered her pebbles and sunflower seeds. Someone even tied a tiny postman's hat to her head, though that only lasted 2 minutes before she flung it into the compost. There was something deeply hilarious and weirdly magical about seeing a goose carry a postcard to someone's doorstep. And yet the more I watched her, the more I saw that she was taking it seriously. She paused before gates. She waited until the door opened. She didn't drop a single letter in the mud, except, of course, when she was angry. Matilda had opinions. If she didn't like the smell of your house, she stood 5 feet away and honked until you came to her. If you tried to take the letter without petting her, she squawked. If you offered her anything with raisins, she would flap her wings and act like you just insulted her ancestors. One time the village priest handed her a church bulletin wrapped in twine. She snatched it, walked down the path, and dramatically dropped it in a puddle. It felt intentional. Maybe she's Protestant, someone joked. We all laughed. The thing is, I started to think Matilda might have been smarter than we realized. She didn't just know the route, she recognized faces. She remembered who gave her seeds and who slammed doors. One morning she refused to deliver to Mr. Novak, who had once hissed, "Get that feathered demon off my lawn." The next day his letter had a muddy footprint on it. Nobody could prove it was revenge, but we all knew. At night I started drawing little comics of Matilda in my notebook. Goose Post, the feathered courier. In them she had a cape, fought male-eating dogs, and once delivered a letter across a moat guarded by a suspicious swan. I never thought I'd be fascinated by poultry, but Matilda was no ordinary bird. She had turned our ordinary summer into something you wanted to wake up for. And the best part, I had a plan. There was a letter I had been meaning to send. One I would never give to Thomas. One that could only be trusted with a goose who understood secrets and grudges. The letter was tucked beneath my mattress for 2 whole days before I finally gathered the courage to finish it. It wasn't long. In fact, it was embarrassingly short. Just a few sentences scribbled in crooked handwriting with more crossed-out words than kept ones. I was trying to write to Lily. Lily with the long braids and mismatched socks. She lived near the mill 2 houses down from the stream, where we all used to catch frogs in spring. We weren't exactly friends, not in the regular sense, but we'd talked during the plum harvest the year before. She'd helped me find my lost cat, and once she lent me her pencil sharpener, even though I'd accidentally broken the one she gave me the week before. So really, in my mind, we were as good as married. My letter wasn't romantic, or maybe it was in the awkward 10-year-old kind of way. I think I wrote something like, "You're very good at climbing trees. If you ever want to climb the one in our yard, you can. Also, I have a spare slingshot. It's red." It was all very professional and respectful, sort of. I sealed it in a plain envelope and addressed it carefully. To Lily near the noisy mill, but not the yellow house that's her uncle's. I hesitated only once before walking over to Mr. Petrov's with the envelope tucked behind my back. He was clipping raspberry vines by the gate and glanced over his glasses as I approached. "I've got, a letter for Matilda to deliver." He didn't even blink, just nodded solemnly and took it from me like I was handing him state secrets. "Very well," he said, tucking it into her little blue pouch with exaggerated care. "High priority delivery." Matilda gave me a long, slow blink. Then she turned and began her march toward the mill, her head held high, like she was carrying a treaty between warring kingdoms. I followed her, but only until the bakery, then ducked behind a low wall. I didn't want Lily to see me watching. That would have ruined everything. I peeked between 2 lilac bushes just in time to see Matilda stop in front of the right house. Lily's. The porch creaked. Lily's mother opened the door, and there stood Matilda, chest-puffed eyes, gleaming letter, balanced perfectly in her beak. "Oh," said Lily's mother, laughing. "Special delivery." Lily came into view a moment later, barefoot, wearing one of her infamous sock combinations, one striped, one polka-dotted. She took the letter, looked around, and I ducked deeper into the bush, then held it close like it was something magical. Matilda turned and left without a word, like a true professional. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside felt like a sign, plums hitting the ground, wind whistling through the shutters, the faint quack of a duck somewhere far off. I kept playing the moment in my head over and over, her reading it, maybe laughing, maybe not. Maybe she'd write back, maybe she wouldn't. Maybe, tap, something hit my window. I bolted upright. Tap, tap. I crept over and pulled back the curtain. There, standing on the windowsill of our chicken coop beneath my window, was Matilda. She wasn't alone. Balanced precariously in her beak was a slightly wrinkled envelope. My name, first name, only written in purple ink, with a tiny doodle of a frog underneath it. I rushed downstairs so fast I tripped over the cat. Matilda waited patiently outside the back door, the letter still held tightly. I took it with trembling hands. "Thank you," I whispered. She gave a single honk, then strutted away into the moonlight. Aterm. The letter, it was perfect, 3 lines. "Thanks for the slingshot offer. I'm better at climbing than aiming. Also, I like red." I sat on the back steps for a long time, staring at it like it might disappear. And just like that, I became one of Matilda's regular clients. From then on, I saw her differently. She wasn't just the goose who'd replaced Thomas. She was a confidant, a secret bearer, a winged messenger of possibility. Other kids caught on too. They started writing to each other, not just notes, but dares, jokes, riddles. We began folding paper into silly shapes and addressing things with clues instead of names. To the boy who always smells like jam, or for the girl with the loudest sneeze, Matilda delivered them all. She didn't judge. She didn't peek, though I often wondered if she could read. And she never lost a single one. Well, almost never. But that's a story for another day. By the time August rolled in, Matilda had gone from a curious village novelty to a full-blown institution. Her mailbag had been upgraded, now stitched from sturdy brown cloth, with tiny brass buckles on the sides. Someone we suspected the tailor's wife had even embroidered a little emblem on the flap, a white goose flying over a letter with wings. Matilda tolerated the bag's improvements with her usual stoicism, pausing occasionally to shake it back into place when the strap slid crooked over her feathers. Mr. Petrov took on the role of postmaster with a seriousness that rivaled any government worker. He built a wooden crate with 3 labeled sections, in, out, and misc. That last section, he said, was for mysterious envelopes with no return address, or the ones that smelled suspiciously of cheese. Every morning, people would stroll by Mr. Petrov's garden to drop off their letters. They started folding origami shapes out of them, birds, fish, frogs, because Matilda, oddly enough, seemed to prefer carrying those. "Keeps her entertained," Mr. Petrov said, as if he had interviewed her directly. It all worked somehow. The system had life rhythm and even etiquette. You tipped Matilda with corn kernels or dried apple slices. You didn't overload the bag. And if you were unkind, well, you might find your letter dropped in your pig trough. But Matilda wasn't just delivering postcards and poetry anymore. She was being requested. That's how I learned about Mrs. Horvath's pickle recipe emergency. It started when a cousin from another village sent her a family brine mix she'd been waiting months to receive. Matilda delivered it in under an hour. She even sat on the windowsill until Mrs. Horvath brought out a small saucer of vinegar-soaked cucumbers as thanks. The goose loved them. From that moment on, Matilda became more than a mail carrier. She became a kind of feathered lifeline. Need to pass a message to the butcher 2 streets over, Matilda. Forgot your cousin's birthday and needed a quick apology note delivered with flair, Matilda. Want to send a letter to a secret admirer, but too shy to say your name, Matilda, again. I even saw someone, no idea who, tie a tiny bag of sunflower seeds to her leg with a note that simply read, "You're doing great." The entire village leaned into the fantasy. It made life sweeter, somehow more peculiar in the best kind of way. There were rules, of course. Mr. Petrov posted them on a chalkboard by the fence. No more than 3 letters per person per day. No wet envelopes. No onions, Matilda detests them. Respect the goose, always. That last one was underlined twice. Even the mayor got involved. He visited Mr. Petrov one afternoon to officially acknowledge the role of one Matilda Goose as interim auxiliary mail handler, pending further discussion. We all knew what that meant. Matilda was the real deal now. I remember the exact day the baker's son tried to put a candy bar in the mailbag. He thought it would be a sweet surprise for someone, but Matilda interpreted it as a bribe or possibly a threat. She flung it across the yard, honked 3 times in rapid succession, and chased him around the well twice before returning calmly to the mailbox. She's got standards, Mr. Petrov said, nodding. I'll never forget the time she delivered a love note and a breakup letter on the same day. The wrong people got them, which led to a series of confusing but ultimately harmless misunderstandings. Still, Mr. Petrov had to gently announce that Matilda would be taking Sundays off to recalibrate. But the crowning moment of her career that summer, it was the Goose Parade. No one planned it, not really. It started with a few kids tying ribbons around her ankles. Then someone brought a kazoo. Then came a line of children walking behind her, each carrying a fake envelope. Matilda didn't seem to mind. In fact, she led the way with more dignity than the mayor on Flag Day. She walked the length of the village square, then paused by the statue of General Kolya, as though posing for a portrait. Everyone clapped. She bowed. And then she pooped near the general's boot. We tried not to laugh too hard. At home that evening, I told my parents everything. My mother, always skeptical of celebrity animals, finally cracked a smile. Well, she said, at least she's useful. More than I can say for your uncle's parrot. But not everything was picture perfect. The more famous Matilda became, the more people expected from her. Some left packages which she couldn't possibly carry. Others tried to send money through her pouch. One person who never came forward sent a jar of pickled onions as a prank. Matilda refused to leave her perch for a full day. Mr. Petrov was furious. I run a postal service, not a petting zoo, he shouted, though no one was sure whom he was yelling at. I started noticing the change too. She still did her rounds, still strutted proudly with her pouch bouncing at her side. But sometimes after her final stop, she'd pause under the plum tree in our yard, stare off into the distance, and let out a single low honk that sounded tired. I didn't say anything, not yet, but I had a feeling something was coming. Something that might test even the most professional of geese. It started innocently enough with a letter I shouldn't have written, and a goose who had already done more than anyone ever asked of her. One afternoon, after a morning of chores and exactly 3 overripe plums for lunch, I found myself sitting on the porch steps, twirling a pencil in my fingers. The sun was high and the cicadas were buzzing in that endless, lazy chorus they save for the hottest days. It was too warm to run, too bright to nap, and the village had slipped into that sleepy hush where even the cats moved like melted candle wax. I thought about Lily and about the last letter she'd written. You can use my red string next time you build a kite. I'll pretend I didn't notice you stole the tail off mine last summer. It was teasing, sure, but friendly. So naturally, I took that as encouragement. I decided to write her something special, something with flair. I picked out my best paper, cream-colored, with a faint smell of chamomile from being stored in my desk drawer, and wrote what can only be described as a declaration of casual, maybe sort of friendship with romantic undertones. I drew two stick figures climbing a tree together. One was holding a slingshot, the other had a braid. It was subtle. I folded the letter into a small swan and walked it over to Mr. Petrov's fence. He wasn't outside, but Matilda was there half asleep beneath the fig tree, her pouch unfastened, resting beside her. She opened one eye as I approached. "High priority," I whispered, slipping the swan into the bag. She stared at me. "You know who it's for." She blinked slowly, gave a soft grunt, and rose to her feet with all the grace of a retired opera singer, accepting one last encore. I watched her go. Her steps were steady, measured, purposeful, but I never saw her deliver it. I waited the rest of that day and the next. No reply. Not even a doodle. I even lingered near the mill, pretending to pick wildflowers, hoping to accidentally bump into Lily. But she was nowhere to be seen. 3 days passed. Then came the whispers. It started in the bakery queue. "Did you hear the Brackoviches never got their dinner party invitation?" I heard Matilda lost it. No, she ate it. By afternoon, half the village was muttering about a missing envelope, cream-colored, folded like a swan, meant for the Brackoviches, who were hosting a small but fancy evening in honor of their daughter's piano exam results. Panic spread like jam on warm bread. Someone spotted a half-crumpled note in the ditch near the chapel. Another claimed they saw Matilda squabbling with a squirrel near the orchard. A third person, possibly the potter's aunt, swore they saw a boy, they didn't name names, thankfully, slipping a personal letter into the mail pouch, possibly upsetting the Goose's delicate professional balance. I stayed quiet. Lily still hadn't said a word to me, and the thought of her getting a letter meant for someone else, or worse, not getting one at all, was eating at me like a worm in an apple. That evening, Mr. Petrov posted an update on the chalkboard. "All mail services paused until further notice. Matilda is on leave. Do not disturb." The village took it harder than expected. Children sat outside their homes with folded frogs and tiny scrolls clutched in their hands. A few elderly folks complained that their knees couldn't handle walking their own letters to the recipient. One even petitioned to make Matilda's position official, with pay-corn stipend and Sundays off. Mr. Petrov was silent. He didn't come out for 3 days. Neither did Matilda. Her little blue pouch hung empty on the fence, fluttering in the breeze like a forgotten scarf. Guilt wrapped itself around my shoulders like a heavy blanket. I had broken the system. I had treated her like a friend when maybe she just wanted to be a goose with a purpose, not a matchmaker, not a secret keeper. On the 4th day, I crept to Mr. Petrov's gate with a small note in my hand. No fold, no riddle, no drawing. Just a line of apology. I shouldn't have sent the letter. "I'm sorry, Matilda." I tucked it into the Midsummer box and went home, not expecting anything in return. But the next morning, Matilda was back. She wasn't wearing the pouch. She wasn't strutting. She was just wandering, gently pecking at the grass in front of the Kovach's house. She looked peaceful, maybe even a little lighter. People came out slowly. No one cheered. No one rushed her. Someone placed a saucer of strawberries by the curb and stepped away without a word. I sat on the front step with a book open in my lap, pretending to read. Matilda waddled past me like nothing had happened. As she did, she paused, turned her head slightly and blinked once. Not a honk, not a squawk, just a quiet, knowing look. Then she walked on. I never did find out what happened to the swan letter. Maybe she dropped it. Maybe she knew better than to deliver it. Maybe she ate it out of mercy. Whatever the case, I didn't write to Lily again that summer. But a few weeks later, she passed me a red string during a game of stickball and said, "For your next kite." Which, if you asked me, said enough. After the letter incident and Matilda's brief hiatus, things began to settle. She resumed her deliveries, albeit with a slightly more relaxed schedule. Mr. Petrov, now wise to the dangers of emotional entanglements in the postal process, imposed a strict ban on anything folded into an animal. "You want poetry? Fine," he grumbled one morning, sipping tea from a chipped mug with a goose painted on it. "You want drama? Go to the theater. But no more origami swans. Matilda is not a swan." Matilda seemed pleased by the change. Her route grew shorter, her pace slower. She even began to take brief pauses between houses, stopping to examine flowers or settle beneath shady benches. She had earned it, I suppose. A small celebrity in a village of ordinary folks. But what struck me most was how the village itself had changed around her. Before, Matilda letters were just practical things. Bills, notices, the occasional postcard from a cousin visiting the sea. After, Matilda writing became an art. People poured personality into their envelopes. They used colored pens, scented wax seals, even tiny doodles tucked into the corners. They wrote things that didn't need to be said just because. And people read more too. You'd see neighbors lingering outside with steaming mugs, reading notes by morning light. Grandparents reread letters like bedtime stories. The baker started slipping tiny thank you notes into loaves. And the butcher, famously gruff, began composing haiku about sausages. No one knew what to make of those, but we admired the effort. The post wasn't just mail anymore. It was a form of connection as soft and peculiar as our village's rhythm. Then came the rewards. People started leaving gifts for Matilda, not just treats but trinkets. A small painted stone with her name on it. A little bell which she absolutely hated and flung into the river. Even a red ribbon someone tied gently around her ankle. Children would wait outside in the mornings just to spot her. Some drew chalk murals on the street, Matilda flying over the rooftops, delivering letters with her wings. One child insisted she had seen Matilda fly, and while none of us could confirm it, the idea took root in the village imagination. That's when things started to go too far. The tipping point was the official Matilda fan club, organized by Thomas of all people, the original mailman. Apparently, he had decided to rebrand himself as her manager. He printed tiny badges with her beak on them and handed out flyers that said things like, "Matilda, more than a goose, she's a movement." People laughed at first, but then they joined. And that's when the requests began piling up. Not just letters, but stories, poems, short songs. Someone tried to record a radio broadcast through her mailbag using a little voice recorder. Another wanted her to deliver an entire pie. "Absurd," Mr. Petrov growled. "She's not a food truck." But the villagers were relentless. They adored her, and they wanted to share her. That admiration, sweet as it was, came with consequences. Matilda started to slow down. Not just the dignified pauses she used to take beneath the old cherry tree. No real slowing. Her legs dragged. Her eyes looked distant. One afternoon, she stopped midway through the square, stood still for nearly 5 minutes, and refused to move until someone brought her a slice of melon. "She's tired," my mother said, watching from the window. "They've turned her into a traveling circus." Even I had started writing her fewer letters. Fewer notes for Lily. Fewer poems. I wanted to let her rest, but others didn't. One morning I saw 3 different villagers arguing over whose note should go into her bag first. Mr. Petrov tried to mediate, but the stress was obvious. Matilda watched from under her fig tree, preening quietly, her feathers no longer quite so pristine. Then the strangest thing happened. Matilda stopped taking the usual route. She skipped houses, delivered letters to the wrong people, dropped one at the church that had been meant for the mill. When someone complained, she honked loudly once and walked away utterly unbothered. "She's rebelling," someone whispered. "She's burned out," said another. A group of school children started a chant in the square. "Matilda needs vacation, Matilda needs vacation." It caught on. The next day, someone painted the phrase on the bakery's back wall in bright blue chalk. That afternoon, Matilda climbed onto the roof of the mayor's office and refused to come down. We all gathered in the square watching her like a statue, white and stern against the clay tiles pouch, hanging like a medal from her side. Mr. Petrov finally stepped forward. "I think it's time," he said softly. "She's given us enough." No one argued. For the next few days, Matilda was left alone. No deliveries, no letters, no treats or ribbons or chalk drawings. People still wrote things, but they began walking them to their destinations again. Conversations returned to doorsteps. Postcards were hand-delivered with smiles. It felt like we had all just woken from a very lovely dream. But even as life returned to its slower rhythm, the stories about her remained. People still pointed out the bench where she once refused a raisin muffin, or the cobblestone she tripped on during the parade of ribbons. And every so often someone would say, "Remember when the Goose delivered that apology note from the baker to the priest after the lopsided loaf incident?" And we'd all laugh again. Because we did remember. Matilda had become part of our collective memory, like a festival or a flood or a firefly-filled night that everyone swears happened differently. And I had the red string around my wrist to prove it. Matilda didn't leave. That's the first thing people noticed. There were whispers, of course, that she might fly away one morning, never to return. That she'd had enough of human silliness, paper-scented drama, and awkwardly folded envelopes crammed with poetry and apologies. But she stayed. She just changed her rhythm. She no longer wore the mailbag. Mr. Petrov removed it from its little hook on the fence and hung it inside his shed, where it rested beside his gardening shears and a dented tin labeled "Pickled Turnip, 1963, do not eat." Matilda spent her mornings waddling around the square, occasionally pecking at an interesting flower or sunning herself on the bench beside the mill. People greeted her with respectful nods, not squeals. No one tried to make her wear ribbons anymore. And then one morning she delivered a letter. No pouch, no fanfare. Just waddled up to the apothecary's door, dropped an envelope gently on the mat, honked twice, and walked off like nothing had happened. The village was stunned. Mr. Petrov claimed innocence. "I didn't give it to her," he said, sipping his usual tea with one eyebrow arched. "She must have picked it up herself." We all speculated. Maybe she missed the routine. Maybe she was testing us, seeing if we'd learn not to overload her. Or maybe, just maybe, she had chosen this one. By the end of the week, she'd delivered 2 more, both addressed in different handwriting, both carefully left at the correct doorstep. A new kind of routine began. People would leave a single letter on the low stone wall by the stream, weighted down with a plum or a smooth pebble. Some days she ignored them. Others she'd pluck one and carry it almost meditatively across the square. It wasn't about the number anymore. It was about the message. She'd become selective. Children called her Matilda the Wise. Adults, chuckling softly, started calling it the Goose test. If Matilda chose your letter, it meant it had something. Heart, honesty, simplicity. I tried it once. Just a small note written on the back of a plum receipt. I didn't even address it. Just wrote, "Thank you for staying." I left it beside a few wild strawberries on the wall and went to the bakery, not looking back. By the time I returned, the strawberries were gone. So was the note. She never told me if she took it, but I had a feeling. That autumn, Matilda took to visiting the schoolyard in the afternoons. The teacher, Miss Lenka, began using her visits as story prompts. "What message do you think Matilda has today?" she'd ask, chalk in hand. Children would shout out answers. "Don't fight with your sister. Eat more fruit. Tell the truth before she honks at you." Sometimes Matilda would honk softly when a particularly good answer was read aloud. One rainy Thursday, the school put on a small puppet show featuring Matilda as the heroine who delivered a message that saved the moon from loneliness. Matilda sat beside Mr. Petrov in the audience. She didn't blink once during the entire performance. Afterward, she was fed a ceremonial slice of cucumber and bowed just once. Even the mayor came wearing a tie with little geese on it. The village began to feel whole again. Letters were still written, but fewer, more thoughtful, sent with the understanding that they might not be chosen, but that was okay. The act of writing, it seemed, had become the real point. And Matilda, she seemed content. Her steps were measured, her eyes bright. She took long naps in the sun, often under the fig tree or behind the blacksmith shop, where the warmth from the forge made the stone just right. Every so often, she'd waddle past my house, pause by the plum tree, and look up at my window. I always waved. Sometimes I'd find a feather on the doorstep the next morning. Once she even dropped a pebble shaped like a heart onto our garden path. My mother nearly cried. My father picked it up, washed it, and placed it on the kitchen shelf beside the spice jars. We never spoke much about what she was anymore. Not a mail carrier, not a mascot, not quite a pet. She was Matilda, a fixture, a feeling. A feathered reminder that even in the quietest places, stories can find ways to fly. One cold morning near the end of the year, I saw Mr. Petrov standing by the stone wall. In his hand, he held an envelope, thick parchment, sealed with dark red wax. Matilda stood beside him watching. Without a word, he leaned down, placed it gently on the wall, and stepped back. She looked at it, then looked at him. He whispered something too soft for me to hear, and she picked it up in her beak and walked off slower than usual toward the narrow hill path that led out of the village. No one followed her. No one asked who the letter was for, but we all watched, hearts held in our throats, until she disappeared over the ridge. She came back, of course. 3 days later, feathers slightly ruffled a bit of dirt on her beak. She never told us where she'd gone, but Mr. Petrov seemed lighter. We didn't ask. Some things we'd learned are better left in beaks and feathers. Winter rolled in slowly that year, dragging its feet like a sleepy bear. The trees outside my window turned from gold to bare, and the wind started whispering through the cracks in the old kitchen door. The village smelled like wood smoke and cinnamon, and every morning our breath came out in little clouds like miniature ghosts. Matilda didn't seem to mind the cold. She walked a little slower, sure, but she still made her rounds, less like a mail carrier now, more like a neighbor checking in. Her feathers puffed up against the chill, and when the frost settled thick on the ground, she waddled over it like a snowplow with dignity. People began to leave her warm treats, steamed carrots, corn porridge, the occasional lukewarm apple turnover. She accepted them with the kind of restrained grace you'd expect from royalty at a banquet. On particularly icy days, Mr. Petrov would knit tiny wool cozies and wrap them gently around her legs. She never protested, though she often kicked one off halfway through her walk, as if to say, "I appreciate the effort, but let's not be silly." What amazed me was how quiet things became. Letters still appeared, but they were gentler now. No perfume, no glitter, just simple, honest words in careful handwriting. I remember one I saw tucked near the bakery's windowsill, folded in plain brown paper. It said to my daughter, wherever she is, "I'm sorry, I love you." Matilda picked that one up right away. She walked it down the narrow path by the chapel, through the trees that curled in like reaching fingers, and disappeared behind the hill. No one knew where it went. But the next morning, someone left a fresh sprig of rosemary on the stone wall with a note that said, "Forgiven." People started calling it the Winter of Kind Letters. I suppose it caught on because it was easier than saying what we all really felt, that Matilda had changed us. And in a way, she had. We no longer rushed our words. We took our time. Even the children wrote slower, more thoughtfully, their sentences full of warmth and small wonders. I kept writing too. Mostly for myself, some for Lily. We never addressed each other directly anymore. But sometimes I'd leave a note that said tree branches are slippery in winter, especially the tall ones. And 2 days later, I'd find a reply tucked under a stone. Good thing I'm excellent at landing. Once I slipped a note into a jar of plum jam and left it on the stone wall. No name. Just, I hope you like sweet things that take time. A week later, I found a folded napkin inside my coat pocket with a drawing of two stick figures sharing toast. Matilda never carried those notes, but she watched, always watched. The day the snow finally came, it came with a softness I didn't expect. No wind, no storm, just a steady hush from the sky blanketing the rooftops and curling around the chimneys like a quiet sigh. The whole village paused. I bundled up and stepped outside to see it all quiet and white, the world wrapped in velvet. And there she was, Matilda, standing in the middle of the square looking up at the sky. She had no letters, no pouch, nothing on her but a single red ribbon tied around one leg. It looked suspiciously like the one I'd lost from my kite months earlier. She saw me. I didn't wave, neither did she. We just stood there facing each other as snow fell around us, coating the stones and fence posts, frosting the corners of windows and the tops of our boots. It was the kind of moment you don't photograph. You just keep it somewhere behind your eyes. Eventually, she turned and walked toward the stream, slowly without urgency. I followed, crunching quietly behind her just far enough not to disturb her thoughts. We reached the stone wall together. Someone had left a letter. White paper, no envelope, held down by a single pine cone. Matilda stared at it. So did I. The snow covered it halfway by then, but I leaned down and brushed it off. One sentence. That's all. You don't need to carry it. Just know it was written. I didn't recognize the handwriting. I didn't need to. Matilda tapped her beak once against the stone, then turned back toward the village, leaving the letter behind. Sometimes it's not about delivering the message. It's about knowing someone wrote it. We walked back in silence, our footprints filling slowly with snow. That evening, the village square was empty. The wind had picked up just a little, and the lanterns flickered with soft golden light behind frosted glass. I sat on the porch steps with a blanket over my shoulders, sipping tea, and Matilda settled beneath the plum tree, her feathers fluffed, her eyes slowly blinking shut. For the first time in a long while, I didn't want to write anything. It was enough to be still, to sit, to listen to the snow and know that somewhere someone was writing something true. And maybe, just maybe, a goose would carry it when the time was right. As spring pushed its way back into the village, the snow shrank to slush and then finally disappeared altogether, leaving behind wet footprints on the cobblestones and the scent of thawed earth. Buds returned to the plum tree outside my window, and the fields stretched green and soft beneath skies that once again hummed with birdsong. Matilda, as ever, kept her own pace. She began her mornings earlier now, just after sunrise, taking her usual slow loop through the village with no pouch, no destination, only her thoughts and the occasional low honk that echoed across the rooftops. No one expected her to deliver anything anymore, but sometimes she still did. Letters appeared in surprising places, nestled in windowsill, tucked into boots left outside, even folded neatly and slipped beneath doormats. There was no pattern, no system, and no one ever saw her drop them off. They weren't old letters. No one recognized the handwriting. Some were poems, some were riddles, some were just simple notes. I saw the way you looked at the stars last night. Or, it's okay to not be brave every single day. Once someone found a letter that said only, "Thank you for planting flowers where the ground used to cry." People called them goosegrams, but no one dared ask Mr. Petrov if he was behind them. He'd just grunt and sip his tea like always. The truth was, deep down, we liked not knowing. We liked the mystery, the magic of it all. Even the mayor received one, delivered under his desk blotter, Take longer walks. Your thoughts are quieter when your shoes are muddy. He framed it. By now, Matilda had reached myth status. Children made up bedtime stories about her. Some believed she once flew to the moon, carrying a letter to an astronaut with a homesick heart. Others insisted she could understand music and only dance to waltzes. One morning, a traveling merchant passed through and paused by the old stone wall. He watched Matilda waddle past and chuckled. "In my town," he said, "we have a cat who sorts marbles by color." We all listened politely, then glanced at Matilda. "That's cute," someone said. "But does the cat take letters about broken hearts?" The merchant blinked. "No, I don't think so." Matilda strutted past, flicked her tail, and honked once, light and amused. In the evening, she still visited the schoolyard. Miss Lenka had started letting the children write letters to the air. These weren't addressed to anyone, they were simply thoughts the students needed to let go of. They tied them to strings and hung them from the big tree at the edge of the yard. The first time they did it, Matilda walked right up to the tree, looked at the fluttering pages, and sat beneath them for nearly an hour, blinking slowly. The next day, 2 of the strings were missing. No one ever saw them again. I sat under that tree once on a quiet Sunday and watched the wind tug at the dangling words. I'd written my own letter. What do I do when the world grows louder than my thoughts? I hadn't expected an answer. But when I got home, a small leaf had been placed on the windowsill. On the underside, etched lightly in dirt, was a single word: listen. I didn't tell anyone. Some things are just for you. Lily and I had begun to talk more openly by then. Not in letters, not through Matilda, just as ourselves. We'd walk the old bridge path after supper, tossing stones into the creek, laughing at the frogs who always seemed just out of reach. She wore the same red string around her wrist. We never mentioned it. We didn't have to. Matilda would sometimes pass us on those walks, never breaking stride, never looking directly at us. But once she stopped mid-path, shook a bit of mud off her foot, and continued walking, just enough to splatter both of us. Lily burst out laughing. "Symbolic goose behavior," she said. I nodded. "Probably means she approves." As spring deepened, new goslings hatched by the riverside. None were Matilda's, of course, but she watched them with a gentle kind of distance. A grandmother who had never had children, but somehow still understood what it meant to care. One of the goslings followed her once, just for a few feet. Matilda didn't shoo it away. She let it walk beside her, then nudged it gently toward the others with her beak. That night, someone left a tiny note tied to a daisy on the stone wall. "Matilda teaches by walking," and that was it. We didn't need explanations, not anymore. It was enough to watch her stroll through the village like a dream still unfolding. Enough to know she had changed how we spoke, how we listened, how we reached for one another. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the rooftops, casting the square in that golden hush only spring knows how to make, I found Matilda sitting in front of our house. She didn't move when I stepped outside, just blinked. I sat beside her. We didn't speak, didn't need to. A breeze rustled through the plum tree, carrying the soft scent of blossoms and a single loose petal, which landed right on Matilda's back. She didn't shake it off. Instead, she stood, stretched her wings slowly, and walked away, the petals still clinging to her feathers, like a message no one had written, but everyone somehow understood. By the time summer returned, everything felt a little softer. The edges of the days blurred in that way they only do when you fully surrendered to warmth. Even the shadows seemed slower, stretching lazily across the cobblestones like cats in the afternoon. The village buzzed quietly with bees and stories. Matilda remained herself, but not entirely. Her steps were still steady, but there was a new kind of pause between them, thoughtful, like she was considering more than the path ahead. She napped more often under different trees, the apricot behind the baker's, the fig near the chapel, the spruce just past the mill. Each seemed to offer her a different sort of shade, a new texture of rest. Some days she didn't appear until dusk, some days not at all. No one questioned it. The village had learned finally that Matilda was not to be scheduled. She wasn't an alarm clock. She was a presence moving at her own pace on her own terms. The stone wall remained her quiet post. Letters still appeared, not daily, not predictably, but just enough. They had changed too. No longer confessions or requests, but tiny moments, postcards of thought. The tomatoes grew red today. I remembered my grandfather. I hummed your lullaby while baking bread. The kite tore again. I stitched it with green thread this time. Each one folded neatly. No names, no demands. And sometimes Matilda would take one, sometimes not. But no one took it personally anymore. Because we finally understood Matilda's deliveries weren't about convenience. They were a kind of quiet permission to speak honestly, to listen gently, to care without needing reply. The school closed for the summer, and the children built a Matilda resting zone near the stream, complete with a pillow made from an old grain sack and a tiny hand-painted sign, Goose only. All others please tiptoe. She used it once, only once, but it made the children beam for weeks. Mr. Petrov, who now walked with a cane and talked less than he used to, still tended the little wooden box on his fence. In out miss. The words now faded but still visible. He no longer curated the system. Instead, he let the box fill slowly, organically. It became less of a post and more of a wishing well for words. One morning, I found a note in the Miskar slot. My name wasn't on it, but I knew the handwriting instantly. It said, "What if the kite never lands?" And beneath it, "Would that be so bad?" I didn't write back, but I carried the question with me for days. Because maybe some things aren't meant to be caught. One late afternoon, I wandered down to the riverbank. The sun was low, dappling the water with gold. Matilda was there, standing near the edge, watching the current move like slow honey. She didn't notice me at first, or maybe she did and just didn't mind. I sat a little ways off, listening to the water and the quiet shush of grass under breeze. After a while, she stepped into the stream. Just one foot, then another. She didn't swim, didn't wade far. Just stood, letting the cool run over her toes, feathers gently ruffling in the wind. And then, as if prompted by nothing at all, she turned and walked back toward me. Not urgently, not with purpose, just with presence. She stopped beside me, and in her beak, held loosely, was a letter, unfolded, blank. She dropped it at my feet and stared at me, not with the expectation of response, but with the kind of gaze that says, "This part's up to you now." And then she walked on back up the bank, over the hill, and out of view. That night, I stared at the letter for a long time. What do you write when given a blank page by a goose who has carried a village's secrets, wishes, jokes, heartbreaks, and dreams? What can you possibly say that hasn't already been whispered to the corners of this quiet place? Eventually, I wrote just one thing: thank you. No envelope, no ribbon, no address. I left it on the stone wall. She never picked it up. But a few days later, someone left a reply beneath it. It said, "She already knows." And now, as the night hushes, the village and the stars blink gently above the rooftops, everything begins to settle. You can almost feel the warmth of the day fading like steam rising from a cooling teacup. The plum tree sways a little outside my window. The leaves make the softest rustling sound, like a page turning in a book that's nearly finished. The lamp inside the kitchen still glows faintly, casting a golden patch onto the floorboards. The world outside is quiet now. Even the frogs have fallen asleep. Somewhere in the distance, a slow, familiar honk rises and falls. Not loud, not demanding, just there. Like a memory that didn't leave, just curled up for a while in the soft folds of time. And you're part of this story now too. Maybe you've never met a goose who delivered letters. Maybe your mailbox doesn't have a pouch or a fig tree or chalkboard beside it. But maybe, just maybe, there's a space in your own world, where kindness travels slowly, where words matter, where silence is full, not empty. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your thoughts float like letters left on a warm stone wall, unrushed, unread for now, but meaningful still. Inhale softly and exhale even slower. Let the day fall away behind you like a well-folded page in a story you've loved. And if you dream tonight, perhaps you'll walk a cobblestone path under gentle stars and see a white goose pass you by quiet, certain, and maybe carrying a message meant just for you. End of script. Sweet dreams.